Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Sean Sweeney. I am the Director of Education and Special Programs at the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. We're here today with our winner and honorable mention of this year's Board Leadership Award. The Board Leadership Award is used to promote and highlight best practices in the nonprofit sector in the DC region, specifically pertaining to board governance. And both of our groups this year were amazing, and we're so excited to learn more about them today and learn more about their practices that we're going to be going through these videos. This one in particular being about measuring impact. This is one of 3 videos that we're going to be recording. So keep your eyes peeled for the other 2, but we're excited you're tuning in for this one. So next thing I'm going to do is introduce Anne Schrantz with Cohn Resnick, the Board Leadership Awards sponsor. Over to you, Anne.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Anne Schrantz. I'm a partner with Cohn Resnick, and we've been involved in the Board Governance Award from its inception, which is about 10 years now. And, as an accounting firm that specializes in not-for-profit organizations and working with them, I think we were really attracted to the award because it really celebrates board governance and the roles that boards play in helping organizations achieve their missions and succeed into the future, and continually innovating new practices for boards to emulate in order to succeed. So that really spoke to us as auditors and tax preparers. So I just want to thank the center and the selection committee for the great work that they do, and really thrilled to have our winner and our honorable mention awardees here with us today, representatives from those groups to share best practices with you. So really looking forward to hearing about Mike and Zach from Carpenter Shelter and 826 DC, respectively. And I will pass it back to you. So thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Anne. Thanks for joining us. So we're just going to jump right in. So like Anne said, we're joined by Mike with Carpenter Shelter, our winner, and Zachary with 826 DC, our honorable mention. And like I said, the point of this video is really measuring impact and kind of the metrics involved. And it's funny because Carpenter Shelter and 826 DC were both very good at this, but in very different kind of regions. So we're going to have a chance to kind of learn about many different things today, but all kind of under the umbrella of measuring impact and using metrics to do so. So I figure we'll start with Carpenter Shelter, and over to you, Mike. Measuring impact is something that every nonprofit has to do. Sometimes it's a little hard because nonprofit work can sometimes have the tendency to have some hard to measure impact and kind of intangible stuff. And sometimes it can be even a little difficult to just determine what you want to evaluate and finding hard numbers and data to back things up. So then you add in DEI work, and at the same time wanting to avoid tokenism or just filling quotas. So Mike, my main question for you is, how does Carpenter Shelter use metrics for your DEI initiatives?
Sure. Well, thank you. Let me just start by just thanking you for the award on behalf of my colleagues. We're humbled and honored. So thank you very much. But your question and your lead into it is absolutely perfect. It's in our process, we redid our strategic plan in 2020. So moving into 2021, racial equity, we work to see whether it should be across everything or should we have a focus area on it itself. And we decided kind of both, but we did put one large strategic goal for racial equity. And that's important to know first before you can do metrics. Where are you trying to get to with those metrics? So our goal was really twofold for DEI in particular. And the first was, again, one of those soft ones you talked about, develop a robust understanding of racial equity and its impact on homelessness. The second one was a little more specific, use it as a lens to guide all of our actions as an organization, as a board, as staff, and even as individual members of the board or staff or of those sorts of things. So those were the two goals. The understanding, the first piece of it, it was very, very hard to figure out how to grasp that one, because it really comes from discussions and education and awareness and exchange and those sorts of things. So we really didn't come up with a hard metric on that other than just setting a path out of these things that we want to do to grow ourselves and improve our understanding and be better and a better place, all of us, especially on the board, to be able to do the second piece, which is really, make it our lens, make racial equity our lens. And that one, when it's supposed to guide all of our actions. So when I think of the metrics there, I kind of go to DEI. The first one, diversity, making sure that you have open opportunity for everyone to join, and you have a representative group within your board, within your staff, and those sorts of things. That's fairly straightforward with demographics and the board, the staff, the residents, even and especially understanding your larger service area. For us, obviously, the city of Alexandria. So that one a little bit straightforward. Equity. And again, I have to preface all of this by saying these DEI metrics, we have a new committee stood up under our chair, Edith Bullard, and it's a work in progress. But equity, where we've gotten to on that is do we have equal opportunity out there, particularly in the marketplace and that? We went back and we're looking at all of our service contracts and those sorts of things, and making sure that that we have equal opportunities in our procurements and our hiring and those sorts of things. So those are the metrics for equity at this point. Again, we can't solve the bigger equity, but in our role, where we have opportunity is in the procurements that we do, the opportunities we offer for hiring and those sorts of things there. And then the last one really gets hard, inclusion. To us, that's so we have a diverse group. We understand equity, we're working towards equity. And then it's really, how do you have that welcoming culture then? So that, everybody feels like they're part of the team and everybody feels welcome and everybody feels part of the process. I wish I had the magic answer, but that's where we are now. That's where we're working and that's where our discussions are. And probably the key thing is, how do we, especially as a board, hold ourselves accountable in this area? So lots of things we've written on paper now, now we have to hold ourselves accountable. And that's right where we are. So we're on the margin there. We're working on that as we kind of went into the summer break, and we'll be picking that back up with our board meeting in September. So I hope that kind of helps, set the stage for DEI for us.
Definitely, Mike. Thank you. And I appreciate you talking about how it's always a work in progress, right? You're never going to have like the silver bullet to do everything at once and do it all correctly right at once. So I appreciate you kind of telling us that, it takes some time and it's never really going to be, it's always a work in progress. So thank you. I appreciate that. Switching gears a little bit. One of the other things that Carpenter Shelter does that really the selection committee loved was you use a trends dashboard. So kind of a multi-part question here is, how do you use it? What do you actually try to measure with it? And what is the board's role throughout that process?
Sure. Well, that's another great question there. So, again, always very important to define what the board's role is vis-a-vis the executive director and the staff and that. And when you start looking at metrics and dashboards and things, you have to make sure, kind of background that you're not getting into the minutia and you're not doing the day-to-day stuff, that you hire a very, very qualified staff and executive director to do all of those things there. So where we engage is particularly through the respective committees and the board itself, at a little bit higher level. So at the committee level, the board members will share their expertise in each respective area, for instance, program or my particular one, the operations subcommittee. We'll share our expertise as we not only look at those, but in the first step, build those metrics. What are the right things that should be on that dashboard that we should be trending? And then that floats up to the board, where on a quarterly basis, we take a look at that dashboard. What you've seen is largely in the program area for our program subcommittee, and that's largely around the effectiveness of serving our clients. And again, so we gather this on a monthly basis. We look at it at the board on a quarterly basis. It includes, how are we moving the needle for our customers, for our clients, for our residents and that? How are we moving the needle towards our goal of eradicating homelessness? And importantly for us also is those near homeless or at risk of homelessness, which is sort of a expansion of our thing. So our metrics capture, the existing homeless and how we're working and serving them, as well as the potential homeless there. So use of services, the emergency shelter, the day shelter, how many people are coming in, how long are they staying, those sorts of things. Another thing is, what are the success factors? Again, are we moving the needle? Things like the percent that are leaving for permanent supportive housing. How many of the clients are returning to homelessness? Those are great things to trend, to see not only, what's happening right now, but that, when we put in a new program or a new emphasis, where does it go? And is it successful? Is it working? Or do we need to pull it back? And so we do those too. Housing, tracking the rental subsidies that we're doing and how those rental subsidies help them, establish themselves over the first year. Employment income, one of the things is not only putting a shelter over their head and getting them, permanent housing, but it's also preparing them for that new role. So watching our trends in employment, how many go out there and get a larger salary or a significant improvement in their salary, those sorts of things. Education, we have scholarships for some things, and not only do we track executing those, but what happens to the person afterwards, tracking those people into the future as we go forward. So those are the program ones, basically, that are in our dashboard that we trend. Also, obviously, we've got the finance ones, which are the typical, pretty much standard execution and reporting. Everybody kind of looks at those differently, but they're very, very important. So the finance committee will focus on them first, and then the larger view from the board when it takes it there. But what's interesting for us too, and again, moving the process, what you've seen is what we've been using for the last couple of years. It's very well developed, the program focused dashboard. Now with our new facility, and we've recently had a pretty substantial fundraising campaign, the New Heights campaign, we were focused on operational effectiveness. So adding to how we're serving our clients is how are we maximizing the use of the resources of the facility and our innovation funding that we have. So that's bringing a whole new aspect to the dashboard. Think about things like new facilities. So space allocation, do we have it right? Between what we use for residential, admin, skills training, common space, did we make it right? So we're always kind of watching that. How much is it costing us per resident? Things like that, where how good are we using the facilities there? So program first, but then kind of operational effectiveness. And we've already talked about racial equity and how that one fits in. And the other piece that's probably, that's very important is human capital. We hadn't really focused on metrics on that, but the board, the staff, the volunteers, things like staff development. So we're starting to trend those. Succession planning, very, very focused one on that right now. Compensation benchmarking. How is our compensation levels versus similar ones in similar areas and that. So that's the scorecard, as we call it. A good solid product with program, but as we talked about, moving it on and expanding it. And really, I guess the bottom line is we want that dashboard and the associated metrics to tell us if we're making the strategic plan and if we're achieving those goals, or if we need to put more goals or adjust the goals and things like that. So that's really when it gets up at board level. Are we really moving the organization forward and serving our clients and being operational effective and really utilizing our human capital and supporting them, because they're such an important resource for us. And then obviously racial equity as well. So that's it. Kind of a long story, but it's a big process and all encompassing. So thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's also nice to hear, you have Carpenter Shelter has so many things that they're watching for, but I think it's also nice because people can kind of start where they can, right? You can include things that you absolutely have to right when you're starting the process, and then you can add to it as you get further into it. So it's nice to hear that Carpenter Shelter has kind of adapted so many different things into it that they can use. but people can really, kind of just start wherever they're comfortable. So thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to switch gears now to Zachary over at A260C. And like I said, we have a few different things we're talking about under this umbrella of measuring impact. So to kind of switch gears, even just again from what Mike was just talking about in Carpenter Shelter's initiatives. So A260C has come up with a great way to measure the impact of their writing programs. So Zachary, and that's of course something that can seem kind of hard to measure at first glance, and kind of like putting that on a grade kind of system. So Zachary, my question for you is, how do you do that? What is the actual system that you use to measure the impact of the writing programs?
Sure. Well, first, Sean, thanks for having me. And Mike, it's so great to hear about the work that Carpenter Shelter is doing, and congrats on your recognition. It's just an honor to be in this conversation right now. Talking about evaluation, which is actually quite exciting, I think, for organizations like ours. So Sean, as you said, we are a writing organization. Our mission here at A260C is to provide writing instruction and publication opportunities to DC students so they can develop a lasting and transformative relationship with writing. So our approach is arts-based. We use the literary arts as a vehicle to support skills-based writing education and academic achievement. So for a long time at A260C, we were between these two schools of thought, right? We are an arts organization and we are an education organization. What does that mean in terms of how we evaluate our impact? Because there can be very different philosophies around how you measure impact in an art space versus an education space. And so we grappled with that for a really long time. And we too just emerged from a really robust and illuminating strategic planning process through which we realized that we are actually both of those things. And the reason why our mission is effective is because we merge arts and education as a way to engage young people in the learning process. And thus we need an evaluation strategy that brings in those two schools of thought. And we're lucky to have a board that has members that really come from different perspectives on the arts and education space. We have writers on our board who care about how you effectively write a poem, right? Or journalists who care about telling a story. And then we have educators and researchers and evaluators who understand what that means in an academic context. So that diversity of thought is reflected on our board, and that made for some really dynamic, robust, and frankly challenging conversations around evaluation in our strategic planning process. So you asked Sean, how do we do it? We're figuring it out, right? We're figuring it out like every other small nonprofit that tries to punch above our weight. But for us, because our approach is both imaginative and skills-based, we need an evaluation strategy that looks to both of those angles. So in some ways, our evaluation strategy is twofold. We partner with 826 National. We are our own separate 501c3 based here in the district, but we are part of a federated model of writing centers across the country. And we get some degree of professional development support and evaluation support from our colleagues at 826 National. So they provide us with a partnership through the National Writing Project. The National Writing Project is an assessment firm that looks at writing through their tool called the Analytic Writing Continuum. And basically, that is a way of assessing quality of writing and progress towards proficiency in writing according to 6 key metrics. So stance, sentence structure, fluency, and a number of others. So every year, we provide anonymous pre and post writing samples through NWP. And what we get in turn is some data on the efficacy of our program in terms of writing proficiency. Are students becoming better writers, more effective writers as a result of our interventions? How do we know that that's working? Where do we see ourselves falling short, and how can we adjust our programs so that students emerge from our programs being able to more effectively write in a classroom context and beyond. And it's important to note that our evaluation strategy in terms of writing proficiency is not measuring individual students. These are anonymized samples. This data informs how we shape our programs, what our in-school programs looks like, how we curriculum develop, where publication can enhance engagement in the learning process. So every year, that data from the National Writing Project informs how we shift our programs moving forward so we get closer to the ideal for providing interventions for writing proficiency. So that's that skills-based piece of it. But then we're also interested in a social emotional dimension of our work and understanding how we're doing that well. So we provide a pre and post survey to our teachers, our parents and guardians, and of course to our students that aims to measure whether and how 826DC is helping young people feel more confident in seeing themselves as writers, feel like they can tell their stories, and feel like they can problem solve through a relationship with writing that goes beyond the classroom space. And so we use that social emotional dimension with the academic skills information that we get from the National Writing Project as that sort of dual approach to understanding the efficacy of our programs. We consider this our capital A assessment or capital E evaluation approach because it provides us with ongoing data that we use to inform our programs for the year ahead. And that was really born out of a commitment that the board and the staff articulated around our purpose, and that we are both an arts and an education organization that's interested in the social emotional well-being of young people in the city and their ability to navigate a path forward through writing instruction.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. And you've already kind of touched on this, but can you talk more about just like what the board's role is in all of this? I know during the process, it came out that you actually kind of made a conscious choice to add someone on your board who could lead the charge on this evaluation piece. So what did that process look like?
Yeah, so what I just talked about, as I said, was the capital A assessment piece. But this strategic plan that we've outlined is really one that's interested in lowercase a assessment. So what does it mean to be building in practices, to be norming practices that constantly are checking the efficacy of our programs in real time? So things like peer observation models, clear objectives in our curriculum design, a feedback loop between staff, volunteers, and teachers, building a culture of better understanding. And that to me was the real transformative piece of this last strategic plan, was that our board helped us, particularly our programs committee, helped us understand what it means to build a culture of lowercase a assessment, that ongoing, in the moment, in real time feedback loop that is helping us understand how our programs are meeting the needs of young people and teachers across the city. One of the most transformative pieces of feedback we got in this strategic plan, which was from one of our board members who sits on our programs committee, Dr. Meyer Daughtery, and she said, we need to be thinking of this strategic planning process as one of experimentation, right? So we are working toward a better understanding of how we do our work by trying out new forms of curriculum development, by learning from the data that's coming in real time and through the National Writing Project, by being in these peer observation models that allow us to constantly evaluate how our programs are meeting the needs of students. And so it was a paradigm shift from the typical way we think about assessment, which is, are our programs working? How do we know? And how do we report that out to our funders in our community? To what we are actually engaging in over the next 2 to 4 years, which is, we are a culture of understanding, we are a culture of learning, and we are going to bring that approach to how we build our curriculum, and a humility in building that curriculum so that we are constantly open to evolving that work. And that came out of those strategic planning processes. And there was a real freedom that we received from the board that allowed us to really look to these next 2 to 4 years as an experimental space, as an opportunity for us to build a better understanding of how our programs actually function.
Great. Thank you so much, Zachary. I really appreciate your answers there. That wraps up our video, everybody. I want to thank Mike from Carpenter Shelter, our winner this year, Zachary, of course, the ED from A260C, for your insight into these many topics under this umbrella kind of term of measuring impact. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in, and make sure to keep an eye out for our 2 other videos. Thanks so much.